Hi, this is Jack Downs with a little video for people who missed class on Tuesday, October 21st in JOU127. In particular, this would have probably been considered class 16 or something like that. And when I introduced the idea through guided notes of the small groups, I reviewed some of the things in your chapter about small group problem solving, and then I talked about reflective thinking. I didn't do types of persuasion then. I did review Monroe's motivated sequence. So types of persuasive presentations will be in a following presentation. We did a bunch of other stuff too. I introduced the whole poetry idea. You should look at the daily schedule, of course, always to see what's really due. You have upcoming assignments which are due, some things that were due recently. So keep on track of the daily assignments, of the assignments, what's due and what's going to be due. Make sure to do your reading and make sure to keep up with your study guides. And I hope you're noticing how significant the study guides are in helping you do better on the exams, of which we have an exam coming up. Okay, so small groups. As you read your chapter 20, which was assigned, let me relate to you about small groups and why this topic is important. You have already been working in many small groups in your classes, probably for presentations or other work, right? Or clubs. You work in small groups all the time, doing decision making, solving problems. Of course, this will continue throughout your college career, and then of course it continues out into the workplace. It's hard to imagine any job you would have where you wouldn't have at least some small group work, even if it's a safety committee or something for your job. So small groups and being able to work well in small groups and knowing how small groups should perform are critical skills. So one of the things we talk about with small groups is leadership. What kind of leader do you have? Now, you may end up being the leader of a group. So we'll also talk about leadership functions. All these things can be really useful to you now and in the future. First of all, leaders. Yes, you might not have any leader in your group, especially if it's a small task and a small group, and you know each other well and know each other's skills well. You may just jump in and do the task and be done with it. But when tasks are larger, answers aren't as obvious, and then you likely do need a leader to try to organize the group. Well, how is the leader going to happen? Well, you could have a designated leader. That would be as if I assigned the groups and said, in each of these groups, these are the leaders. This is the leader in your group. Maybe because I assigned a teaching assistant, and that's going to be the leader of the group. So you could be in a group in the workplace where a leader was assigned because it's somebody in management or something. So someone else has made the decision that there's a leader. Does that mean it's a good leader? Not necessarily, but at least the decision was made that there should be a leader. Now you can judge the quality of that leader. Two other kinds of leaders you can get would be implied and emergent. And they both have potential problems. Implied means it seems to everyone somewhat obvious who should be the leader. They are the most experienced person. They've done this job before. If you were in a group and one of the people was the TA in the group, you might look to them for leadership. It would be implied that they would be the leader. But is it implied because they're the leader not just because they're older or more experienced? Maybe on the other hand, it's because they're taller, stronger, because they're male, because they're white. There's lots of reasons that you could have an implied leader, which would be bad reasons for leadership. Likewise, emergent leaders are someone, although there's no leader designated, no leader that really is implied, you have a leader who emerges in the group. This is probably one of the most common kinds of leaders. And then they just kind of become the leader just by the fact that nobody said anything about it, and because they emerged as leader. They thought themselves to be a good leader probably, and they weren't asked to do it, right? They became it. Well, the emergent leader, the problem is, what were the reasons that made them emerge? Was it because they just talked more than everybody else? That's probably not a good reason. Is it because they could show they had more experience and they'd done this kind of work before, or so on? Well, maybe that is a good reason. Is it because they're tall and male? No, that's a bad reason. So you have to look at the reasons that your leaders are there. Then you have leadership functions. Regardless of how good or bad your leader is, there's actually a lot of leadership functions that have to happen. There's 3 of them that we particularly talk about: task needs, procedural needs, and maintenance needs. So the group has a task. It could be to, solve a problem, or write a report, or create a presentation. Good. So there are task needs, the things that you have to do to get that task done. And of course, that's the most important leadership function, is to handle the task needs, to make sure the task needs are completed. But if you have a leader who only does the task needs, who's only focused on just getting the job done no matter what, it could be productive, but chances are if task dominates and takes over everything else, people will feel abused, uncomfortable, taken advantage of. It's no fun at all, because we're just too highly focused on the task. The other 2 kinds of needs have to supplement the task need and have a balance with it: procedural needs and maintenance needs. Procedural needs are, and by the way, you do have this handout on guided notes, which the idea is in class, I said all this stuff and you added notes of your own to this handout, because this is on the future study guide and exam. Task needs, we talked about those. So procedural needs, it's like the when, where, what. It's like making the handouts, reserving the room, keeping things organized, right? The leader who does nothing, if procedural needs dominate, they will check all the boxes and everything will be organized, but in the end, nothing gets completed. The task does not get done. Yet without someone focused on procedural needs, a leader that keeps those in mind also, things get disorganized and complicated and inefficient. Then there are maintenance needs. This is about morale, interpersonal relationships. If your leader is over-focused on maintenance needs, if maintenance needs dominated, then that would be a leader that always remembered your birthday and brought a cake and had a party for you, but never got the task done. The group would talk, and everyone would go away feeling good, but they wouldn't actually accomplish things. So we have to balance those things. Now we're going to talk about the reflective thinking model. The reflective thinking model is we could attribute this to John Dewey, philosopher, who also came up with the Dewey Decimal System for organizing libraries. The reflective thinking model first seems kind of obvious, but it is extremely useful for small groups, and we'll see how it can roll into persuasive presentations. It's far too easy for small groups that are involved with problem solving to skip these steps. They skip the first step. First step is just define the problem. Let's come together and write up what we think the problem is. Until we do that, we might not realize that different people in the group have different ideas about what the problem is we're trying to solve. So we all have to agree on what we think the problem is. That's for number 1, easily skipped. Number 2, analyze the problem. Also easily skipped. Let's really make sure we understand the extent of the problem. Once we've defined it, now let's go and research it. Let's find out how big the problem is, how long it's been there, how it's developed. So we could think about what things people tried to do in the past to solve it. So we can analyze the problem. Then we have to establish a criteria for solution. Again, easily overlooked. If we don't decide what a solution needs to do, then how will we know if we have a good solution? So we establish what has to happen for a solution to work. To be a good solution, these are the things it has to do. What are those things? Well, it all depends on your problem. But if you define and analyze the problem correctly, then you should be able to, probably using some research again, establish the criteria for the solution. And then finally we get to number 4, which is where too many people just try to jump in at the beginning in their small group. Number 4, generate potential solutions. Yes, once we've defined the problem, analyzed it, once we've decided how the solution should work, we should be able to come up with some solutions. Probably more than one solution, because then we have to go through those and decide which is the best solution. Coming up with just one solution is kind of weak. If I could come up with 3 solutions, and then I can show the audience, show my group, And you can see all of a sudden how this is going into a persuasive presentation. If I could persuade the audience that of these 3 possible solutions, this is the best one for these reasons because of the criteria I've established for the solutions, then all of a sudden it makes sense. So yes, whereas the reflective thinking model works well for small groups in solving problems, it also is a great way to organize persuasive presentations. Define the problem. What's the problem? Analyze it. Show the audience how big a problem it is, what it is about really. Then explain to them, if we're going to solve this problem, these are the things that a solution has to have. Then I'll tell them the possible solutions that I've come up with, and then explain why mine is the best solution, right? Or the one I'm pushing forward. In this would be a persuasive presentation on an issue of policy, getting people to change something, which is what we're going to be doing in the future. So that's a reflective thinking model. And this really does match in your textbook some of the ways we create persuasive presentations. I'm going to skip over the types of persuasive presentations, but go right into Monroe's motivated sequence. Monroe's motivated sequence is a, in fact, I'll bring up this handout here. It's a even more elaborate, or not elaborate, but more focused way to organize persuasive presentations. In particular, it's used in marketing and advertising, and political speech too. So these are things where persuasion is really important. So when persuasion is really important, like when we spend a lot of money on it for ads, or when we're trying to elect a candidate, or change a policy, or pass a law, or something, then the experts would you go to Monroe's. Monroe's has steps, all right, and these are the steps. The attention step, that's something we've heard before. It's attention-getting devices. In Monroe's, they call it a step, the attention step, getting attention. And it could be getting attention using a variety of devices. Then we have something called the need step. I'll look at it over here. Or let's look it over this way. It defines the problem and creates a need for change. When we use it in a persuasive presentation, the need step is in the body, and it's obviously creates a need. If there is no need, if there's no problem, then there's no need for change. If there's no need for change, then there's no reason to persuade. So we need to define the problem and create a need. Advertising in particular is all about creating a need and satisfying the need. So we have a need step. Define the problem, create a need for change. Next we have a satisfaction step. That is also in the body, and it's usually offering solutions that could satisfy that need. Here's the need. Here are some things we can do to solve the need. In other words, here's the problem. Here's the possible solutions. This is the satisfaction step. Then we have the visualization step. It could be here or it could be in the conclusion. It's usually here, though. We get people to imagine how wonderful it's going to be if we use these solutions to satisfy the need, right? On the other hand, we could get them to visualize how terrible it's going to be if this need is not solved, if this problem is not solved. So we get them to visualize solutions working or visualize what happens without the solution, or both. Visualization is a very powerful tool in persuading people. And then we have the action step, which can come here or at the end of the conclusion when we say, okay, these are the things we can do. These are the things we want you to do to solve this problem, to satisfy this need. It could be to buy a product, or it could be to write your congressman about this problem, or make a poster and go protest, or donate money to this cause. It could be lots of things. In fact, it could be a variety of things. Our actions are not just one action necessarily. There's maybe a variety of actions. Maybe there's actions for people who are really committed, and actions for people who don't have as much time or are not quite as committed to it. Maybe there's some high impact things and some lower impact things. The action step could go in the conclusion, or the conclusion could just review what we've done so far. That's using Monroe's in a persuasive presentation. And if we can actually use Monroe's in an informative presentation. This creates a different kind of informative presentation, but it really works the same way as ours did. Because we start with the attention step, again, just like we do in our informative presentations, we get the attention. But now the need step is inside the introduction. The need step is creating now a need to solve a problem. Now we're creating a need to know. right? We're trying to introduce facts that make this a really interesting topic and persuade the audience to keep listening to us, that the information is important, useful, relevant, that they need this information. So this becomes the persuasive part of an informative presentation when we think about using Monroe's in an informative presentation, the need step. Okay, then we have a satisfaction step. The satisfaction again is satisfying the need, but in this case we satisfy it, the need to provide the information, and that's our main ideas. We're not persuading them with these main ideas, we are delivering the information. We said there's going to be good information, now here it is. Visualization can be used in the body. There isn't a required visualization step in informative presentations. The visualization of visualizing how this information works, for instance. Imagine, let's say I'm doing a informative presentation on the life stages of the salmon. I could get people to visualize what it would be like to be this tiny fish swimming in this big river with all these dangers around me. That would really add a lot of pathos, emotional work in that informative presentation. Now, I'm not trying to persuade them, just trying to get them a feel for the information. And in the action step, we don't have an action step in informative presentations because we're not trying to get them to do something, right? Informative presentations do not have an action step. And then at conclusion, we refer back to the introduction, we review the main ideas, and hopefully we give a clincher, which are some things we could do also in the persuasive. So we start to see, and Monroe's lets us see, how the commonalities between persuasive and informative presentations, although it is still important that we keep them distinct in that we know what is informative and what is persuasive. So that's the stuff I went over, and then I did other things too, but that's the main stuff I went over in this class. So I hope you can use your guided notes to keep on track.